This part of the Uber continuing case focuses on Chapter 11 and covers principles related to individual differences and behavior. Human beings are complex and each have individual traits that make it difficult for a manager to apply a one-size-fits-all strategy. The topics of focus on this guidance will include the Big Five personality, dimensions, values, attitudes, and behaviors, and distortions in perception. When we talk about personality dimensions, these are traits that a person displays. There are many traits that we can be considered, but we will look at the 5 traits that are more easily identified. The Big Five personality dimensions text discusses are extroversion, agreeableness, conscientiousness, emotional stability, and openness to experience. Extroversion is how outgoing, talkative, social, and assertive a person is. Agreeableness is how trusting, good-natured, cooperative, and soft-hearted someone is. Conscientiousness is how dependable, responsible, achievement-oriented, and persistent someone is. Emotional stability is how relaxed, secured, and unworried a person is. Openness to experience is how intellectual, imaginative, curious, and broad-minded someone is. Looking at the Big Five, you need to consider the opposites too. So if someone is not an extrovert, they are considered an introvert. Agreeable is opposite of disagreeable, and so on. So when we try to identify a person's personality, we should look at each dimension and determine the personality. So if you look at someone and determine they are an introvert, agreeable, conscientious, emotionally stable, and closed to new experiences, does this make the person good or bad? The answer is no. If I have to work or have responsibilities that require an extrovert that is open to new experiences, it would be a bad idea to assign an introvert that is closed to new experiences. Personality can also explain why people can get along on certain subjects and not on others. In general, the Big Five help define a person's personality so you can be a more effective manager. Values are abstract ideals that guides one thinking and behavior across all situations. For instance, your values could include a person should be honest, should work hard, keep her word, be charitable, and so on. An attitude is defined as a learned predisposition towards a given object. For instance, Chevys are the best. My daddy drove one. My grandpappy drove one. My great-grandpappy drove one. They won't drive anything else, and neither will I. So, if this person is asked, would you be interested in driving a Ford? No, I'm a Chevy man. Attitudes are very difficult to change, and an attitude can soften or harden over time, but typically won't vary from the original predisposition. Behavior is action and judgment. Our values, which are global, and attitudes, which are specific, are usually in harmony, but not always. A manager may have a positive value on being charitable to those that make mistakes at work, but may have a negative attitude to being charitable to a slacking coworker. This is specific. A few of the distortions in perceptions will deal with stereotyping, halo effect, recency effect, and causal attribution. Perception is the process of interpreting and understanding one's environment. Perception is a type of shorthand that we use to understand what is going on in the world. We gather information, interpret it, store it, and retrieve it. So we categorize things, and that is how we quickly deal with situations. Otherwise, we can spend much time and effort in evaluation of every situation. Think of it as, I want a candy bar. You don't evaluate every detail of every offering of a candy bar. You have determined through trial and error that you like chocolate and peanut butter, so your perception is that you want a Reese cup or a Butterfinger. The decision's made. Stereotyping can be considered a bad thing, but we tend to stereotype quite a bit. Again, we are trying to process and interpret our environment. I would suggest that stereotyping isn't bad in general, but it can lead you to a wrong or poor decision or conclusion if you apply a group stereotype to an individual. This will always fail. As you recall from the Big Five personality dimensions, everyone doesn't have the same personality, same values, attitudes, and behaviors. Don't apply stereotypes to individuals. The halo effect is when we form an impression of an individual based on a single trait. A common use of the halo effect is assigning an array of positive or negative traits based on the person's attractiveness or height. If a person is considered more attractive and tall, then the more positive traits are inferred. Less attractive and short, more negative traits. I had an experience that a manager hired an assistant because he looked a lot like Joe. Joe was a top-notch assistant that had recently left employment. Unfortunately, looking like Joe did not translate to be working like Joe. It was a disaster. The recency effect is the tendency to remember recent information better than earlier information. An example, employee 1 performs exceptionally 11 months out of the year, but during the last month has performed poorly. Employee 2 performs poorly in the first 11 months and exceptionally during the last month. The recency effect can be problematic if a manager is completing an employee evaluation. The marginal worker may be rated higher than should be, and the exceptional worker may be rated lower than should be. Lastly, causal attribution is the activity inferring causes for observed behavior. The two biases to consider here are fundamental attribution bias and self-serving bias. The fundamental attribution bias, people attribute another person's behavior to his or her personal characteristics rather than situational factors. For instance, the reject rate is high. The manager attributes the reject rate to the machine operators not being conscientious, which is a personal characteristic, but the workers attribute it to machine problems. This is an external character. By self-serving bias, people tend to take more personal responsibility for success than failure. The text uses a good example. If a student earns a high grade on an exam, then it was due to their hard work and understanding of the material. If a student gets a low grade, then the professor issued a poor test questions or didn't properly explain the material. The takeaway from this chapter is that each individual is different and cannot be easily categorized. As we will find in the next chapter, these differences can make motivation difficult. Not only is everyone different, they are motivated differently too.